This is a very important piece of work that's been released by OECD, and anybody who is committed to building teaching into the profession it deserves to be, we have to take things like this very, very seriously. We have an unbelievably distinguished panel here today, but they're only exceeded in their distinguishedness by the people in this audience. So we need you in this conversation.
I've looked at, how would countries come out if we were living in a level playing field? Children from all countries everywhere in the world would have the same socioeconomic background. I've always heard people saying, well, the US would really come a lot better because of higher amounts of child poverty. But many countries have much higher levels of child poverty, but it doesn't have the same impact on education outcomes. Because in the year 2000, people took the lessons to heart. They thought, this is not rocket science. They looked very carefully, what are those countries and systems doing that moderate the social background effectively? How can we do this in our context? When it comes to the use of data, achievement data, the United States comes out on one extreme, where there's a lot of use of achievement data for accountability. And then you look at the country like Shanghai in China, and you see they actually are a good user of data. Data is a very important part of that. But they're doing a lot of other things as well. About 100% of schools do teacher mentoring, but in a very serious way. About 80% of their schools use written feedback from students about classroom experiences. Very systematic way of actually looking at what students perceive about it. They use a combination of external evaluation and internal self-evaluation. They sort of have written specification of student performance standards. There's a lot of multiple instruments that are used at the very same time. And yes, then they also use data.
And while the global trends are looking good, 40 countries making some kind of progress in some area, the US is stagnating and is flatlining. And so I wonder, Randy, if you could kick off a conversation about our school system, why you think it's flatlining, and what we can do to move the needle.
There's things in Race to the Top like Common Core and things like that, which I think are potentially helpful. But this notion of simply having data as the driver and sanctioning based upon that data and closing schools based upon that data, it shows that over the last 3 PISAs, that hasn't really moved the needle. The countries that really truly value education, not rhetorically, but in reality, are the countries that do better than we do. And they value it in all sorts of ways, whether it be by the respect, the opportunity, the pay, all sorts of things. They robustly value education. And the lessons seem to show this time that the enhancing partnerships with parents, a real kind of bottom-up, how we work with parents and respect parents as real partners. It says something real important about teachers. And you see that with what Andreas just said about autonomy and shared decision-making and distributive leadership, but you also see that in terms of making sure the teachers are well prepared, they're supported, they have time to collaborate with their peers. And so that there is a real strategy about teachers and about teaching. We know poverty is a factor, but how do we mitigate and militate against that? And so we have to actually give kids who have the least the most. China is doing 2 years of pre-K. They get this. Why don't we get this? The data is clear. We have to provide students with robust curriculum based upon implementing the standards well, but not just talking about the standards, and how we bring back the joy of learning. Robust high school experiences, project-based learning, career tech ed, but this notion of leading with equity to get to excellence.
The title is For Each and Every Child. And here's what that means to me. It means a structure, a set of professional roles and expectations, a way of allocating resources, a way of tailoring interventions so that each child really has a right to an instructional strategy that will work for that child. I would like somebody to take Andreas's report and not just tell us how the plumbing there is different from the plumbing here. I'd like an analysis about how the values there are different from the values here.
You have to have great educators, smart, knowledgeable, and able to focus on the needs of each child in every community, in every school. That means you have to invest in professional capacity. We have not been doing that. We have to put the same kind of resources into training teachers that high-achieving countries do. We don't put any money now, really at the federal level, into teacher training, very little into teacher development. We pay teachers about 60% of what a college graduate earns, another college graduate. High-achieving countries pay teachers as well as others, and then they make these huge investments in what teachers know and what they can do, and have high standards and supports for that to happen.
But I think the secret sauce here, in some respects, is that if we prepare our teachers at the front end and through professional development to actually have the training that's necessary to reach each and every child, to understand what the alternative instructional strategies should be and how to deploy these ancillary resources and how to work in teams, all of that stuff, you're actually writing a definition for an elevated kind of professional.
The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. That's been happening for at least 15 years. But then we spend more money in the districts and the schools that serve the children of the wealthy than we spend in the schools and districts that serve the children of the poor. All of the higher achieving countries spend the same amount of money per child or more in the schools that serve higher need kids.
On the property tax issue that everyone has mentioned, geography should not be the determination, of whether you can get the kind of education that you deserve in order for you to succeed in our society.
It was just, so crystal clear that early childhood education pays benefits down the line, and it would be a smart move. And there are proposals. The administration has one. There's legislation pending. There are Republican governors who support this. There are Democrats who support it. It seems like everything's lined up, and yet nothing's happening.
I quite frankly think it's an abomination. I do. Look, we have enough studies. We do not need to have one more study that tells us about when children learn, how they learn. They're like little sponges. We are looking at about, in terms of the Department of Education, about a 14%, it's over $7 billion in cuts to the Department of Education. Title I, teacher quality, after-school programs, impact aid. And the early learning spending. Our best investment is in early childhood education. We are going backwards overall in education funding, and particularly in early childhood education.
When it's often framed in the U.S., it's still focused on the competition. We care more about who's out-competing us than the conditions that they are setting up to move forward. We care more about analyzing the outcomes than securing the opportunities for students. And in fact, when we went to Linda and a group of us, Randy, when we went to Singapore and Finland, we talked with them, they said, we looked at your research in the US, your universities, and we went back and implemented it, right? Yeah. So we don't have an innovations challenge, we have an execution challenge, which puts us at the intersection of beginning to understand, now what's at the core of this execution challenge? Some of it is related to our inability to talk about at a policy level, two core pieces, the role that race plays and government. Yes, we could talk about them in discussions, but when we move closer to the policy level to begin to address it, things break down. It's not just about setting a standard, but it's about providing the supports. So Linda's right. Now that we have Common Core standards, let's have Common Core supports. And let's begin to think through what are those supports to provide all students an opportunity to learn.
We actually have a fair amount of understanding policy-wise and program-wise about what works. But we do need to do the organizing to actually build a movement, a moral movement and an economic movement to make that the policy of the United States of America. And it starts city by city, local district by district, and state by state. And then what will happen is that our spear carriers in the Congress, like Rosa, will have that wind at her back to be able to move the country.